All right, we're back. So today I have the honor of being joined by someone I've had the privilege of knowing since our days at the University of Delaware, a good friend, Dr. Katie Hunzinger. Katie's now an assistant professor of exercise science at Thomas Jefferson University, where she leads research at the intersection of biomechanics, neurology, and human performance. Her work focuses on concussion, traumatic brain injury, and the long term effects of repetitive head impacts, particularly in collision sports like rugby. She's also deeply involved in advancing women's roles in sports and science, serving as a USA Rugby referee and World Rugby educator. I can't wait to talk about that today. And Katie has earned recognition from the NIH, the American Academy of Kinesiology, and the National Neurotrauma Society for her groundbreaking research. Beyond the lab, she's passionate about translating science into strategies that improve athlete health, recovery, and long term well being. I'm very excited to reconnect with her today, not just as a colleague, but as a friend and colleague in exercise science, and to dive into her journey, her research, and her vision for the future of athlete health and performance. Welcome to the show, Katie.
Thanks, Mike. I feel like I need to clap it back to you and, give you quite the grandiose welcome. Mike's this hybrid athlete. He can outlift you and still beat you in a marathon. And
I don't know about that, but no, I wanted to touch upon like everything that you've done since like we've last seen each other from Delaware. I mean, where did you leave off with your research in grad school, postdoc, and where are you now? Can you kind of like
yeah,
walk us through that? I'm interested to know.
man. Yeah, so I feel like, the harsh reality of academia is you have to be willing to go where the jobs are. And sometimes that's not as easy, right? It's a privilege to be able to pick up and move. It's also a privilege to be able to stay. So I met my wife in graduate school. So she's from Philadelphia, large family. So the goal was trying to stay in Philly. So, we kind of had that talk of like, well, I've got some committee members here. Like, I might be able to get a postdoc here in this city or that city. And it was like, cool, great. Like you can go there for a few years and I'll be here waiting. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing that. So I definitely was focused in staying in the Philadelphia areas, which made it hard. You had that less flexibility, but I was very, very fortunate so that when I finished my doctorate in biomechanics, I was able to get a postdoc at Penn. So it was kind of a dual role where I was with the departments of neurology and then the Department of Biostatistics, Epidemiology, and Informatics. And so got to work with Dr. Andrea Schneider, who is a dual credentialed MD PhD. So she's a neurocritical care physician. So she works clinically in the ICU. And then her PhD is in epidemiology. So that's kind of really what I wanted to focus on. Is I was like, I always kind of I flirted with doing an epi PhD and I didn't do it because I really still liked doing the actual interventions and collecting data myself. Um, but I was like, I don't have enough stats training. Like, I feel like everybody who did a PhD was like, just like do a t-test and call it a day. And I was like, I really don't think like that's the answer. Like, and, I was working on all these different concussion studies and I just like, gosh, like, this is like going against everything I learned in epi. Like I was like, oh, like we're just like removing data for whatever reasons, and then we're not accounting for it, and then we're not reporting about it or doing sensitivity analyses. And it just felt like, like you're only as good as your data are. And so I was like, like I can see why, organizations want to sit there and say like, well, this is trash. Like, and I'm like, and they're valid to do that. Like, I'm like, yeah, I agree. It is kind of trash, but it's the best that we have, but could we do better? And so that kind of led me to my postdoc. And, I was very fortunate enough. I remember being about 3 months into my postdoc, talking with my mentors, and they're like, where do you see yourself doing, because we want to help get you there. And I was like, well, I'm flirting with industry, but I do like academia. Like I love research. I love, love, love research, but I do enjoy teaching. Like I'm like, it's fun. It's nice kind of being boots on the ground. So I was like, yeah, I really, I think I'd really like to be at a place like Thomas Jefferson, like it's like an R2, it's got a hospital. But it doesn't have the like tenure and promotion requirements of an R1 because I didn't want to write grants for a living because I know myself, like I'm a workaholic. I was like, if I stay at Penn and I need 100% fund my position with grants by year 3 or whatever the contract would have been. I'm like, I will never stop working. And then I'll just be doing bad science. Like, I feel like it's like that publish or perish mentality. And so I feel like I manifested Thomas Jefferson because all of like a month later, there was a job posting. And I remember like emailing the chair and I was like, hey, is this a real job posting? Because sometimes they have those ghost postings too, where it's like, oh, it's an internal hire, but we had to post it. And they were like, yeah, it's real. Like, go ahead and apply. And so I was like, hey, Andrea, like, I know I'm 3 months into my postdoc, but, like, can I apply for this job? And she's like, yeah, like, it doesn't start for another year anyway. Like, go, like, apply. And I was like, oh, okay, okay. And then, I got the job offer and, started only, gosh, I think I started my postdoc in March 2022. Yeah, March 2022. And then I started my faculty job July of 2023. So it was a very short postdoc, but it was, hey, like that's the goal of the postdoc is get you the job that you want. So it worked out, and so I've been at Thomas Jefferson. This is year 3 now, so we're going places hopefully.
It's funny because I feel like with postdocs these days, like if you talk to a lot of senior professors and you read articles online, they'll say like, oh, a real postdoc should be anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 years. And you think about like 4 years of undergrad, 2 years of master's, maybe 4 to 5 years of a PhD, 2 to 3 years of a postdoc. And you're like, all right, so I'm going to be a starting professor at like 32, 33, 34 years old. And I'm like, and then you have to fight for tenure. Like it seems like
Hey,
you did your homework early to get into a
and
tenure
it's
track role.
yeah, and it's kind of a backward system too, right? Like, there's lack of diversity in postdocs too, because it's like you said, like, okay, so you're going to go do this postdoc for 2 years. So to move and just stay for 2 years is so expensive. And so you're like, okay, so let me move from Delaware. Let's just say I went up to Boston. And so you're going to move to Boston, spend all that money, pay rent in Boston. And then, oh, I got a faculty job in Florida. So now I need to move to Florida. And depending where you get hired, you may or may not get a startup package and they may or may not cover your moving expenses. And like, so unless you're going to an R1, you're probably not getting those things. And so you're like, okay, let me spend this money again. And so, that's my gripe of the postdoc, because then the NIH says, hey, NIH minimum salary is 53,400 a year or whatever. At least that's what it was when I did mine. You know, enjoy postdocs, like go live off of this. And like, I'm like, okay, so who can afford to take this massive pay cut for 2 to 5 years? It's probably people who are married and have a working spouse. And so it's like, it's a privilege to be married. It's a privilege to have found your partner so early in life or later in life or during your doctorate. And then it's like, okay, now go pay rent in a high cost of living area, and the NIH minimum salary is not cost of living adjusted. So it's like, okay, yeah, most postdocs are going to be in Manhattan, Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, San Francisco. And so you're like, okay, yeah, that money went to rent and now I'm living off of top ramen. And so I think it's a broken system where like only the people who are generational wealth, fortunate enough maybe to not have student loans or, what have you, or married, are the people that are going to be able to do a postdoc. And so you're really missing that diversity, I think. And then it's like, oh, look, we just keep uplifting the already uplifted people because they were able to do a postdoc. And so I think it's hard. It's a broken system. I'm fighting the good fight, but I was fortunate that Penn was able to sprinkle a few more dollars our way too. But then that's time spent again that you're not contributing money to retirement, and that's, compounding interest. And so it's like you said, you're like, I'm going to go to school for 10 years and not contribute to my retirement plan for 10 years. And I mean, shoot, if you just had $50 a month for those 10 years and just let that compound, and so I think academia as a whole could do a really better job of trying to promote financial literacy, and also just like trying to integrate something like, hey, like, I know you're a professional student, and you don't qualify for the retirement matching, but like maybe start a retirement account. And, I was fortunate that I worked for a year before doing my doctorate. So I at least had that money there and I could keep throwing money at it during my doctorate. But other people went bachelor's to PhD, and so they never had a retirement account yet. And then they're like you said, oh, I'm 30 and here's your paperwork for your 403B or your whatever. And you're like, cool, what's this? And then your friends are like, I've been working for 8 years already. There's $150,000 in there. And you're like, crap.
Yeah, I remember during like our time in Delaware, like a bunch of us had little side gigs here and there. And like a lot
Yeah,
of us did like, personal training because like we're all exercise scientists. And
right.
for me, like I kept that going for 4 years. And I mean, like we would talk about it and I took like a little bit of heat, but I was like, hey, like, I mean, this is what I love to do. It gives me the independence. And I'm like, yeah, like maybe $100, $200 a month can go a very long way in the way of groceries or fun or something like
Right.
that. Because as you said, like, I mean, all throughout our 20s, I mean, I personally said no to every wedding,
Everything.
every vacation. And it was like any friend I hung out with was also in grad school because I was like, all right, you get it. Like, let's just take a walk, because I can't
Right.
afford dinner.
Yeah, we don't need to base our social activities off of spending money somewhere. Yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah, the amount of
And
walks I took with people was like, oh, look at that.
yeah.
Let's take a walk.
Well, and then it's harder, like for folks like us, where we are domestic U.S. citizens, we had the ability to do that. Whereas if you were on an F1 visa, like you were from another country, they were like, no, you can't drive for Uber. No, you cannot do Grubhub. No, you cannot do personal training. You must not have any employment outside of here. And so then they're like, cool, I have $0. Like, I'm calling my parents for grocery money or something like that, I'm like, gosh, like we got to be doing better somehow. It's hard.
Yeah, I remember like a bunch of us would always say like going from, lab visit to lab visit, your lab might be doing 3 or 4 studies. And I remember just how exciting that was to always do something a little bit different every day. And I was like, it's really a shame I can't do this every day and like support a family on this. Because I would be more than happy to just do like 4 different studies, be in the lab, doing all these different stuff, meeting different participants, crunching the numbers, writing abstracts. But I'm like, unless there's money in that, I can't in good faith do that because I'd just be broke the rest of my life.
Right, I know. It's like dream job is to be a professional PhD student that actually gets paid like an adult salary, right? Like
Yeah.
you just get to learn and do science and do the science that you're interested in, and you're not drowning or trying to figure out how do I fund this science or how do I do this, or you're under the gun that if you don't get a grant, you don't have a job tomorrow, and if you don't have a job, you don't have health insurance and da da da, da. So yeah, it's like I wish that job existed. Unfortunately, it exists, you just have to fund it with your own grants, and that sucks.
And that's when like the pressure starts really coming on too. And it's just like, oh, now I have to adult.
Right, yeah, and it's like, I need these grants or I'm gonna not have a job or I'm not gonna be able to pay daycare. Yeah, it's terrifying, and then the chaos of the grant world now too, you're just like, you never know what's gonna happen that you're like, "This is not guaranteed," and I'm not a betting person, right? I do stats for a living, right? Like, I trust probability, so I'm not trusting things to chance that I don't have control over.
Yeah. So what do I know it's gonna be like kind of like a loaded question, but I'm excited to kind of branch off of this. What do we need to know about concussions and subsequent musculoskeletal injuries?
Yes. So this kind of started as like a side project that we were interested in, and it turned into aim one of my dissertation. Um, Tom Buckley was my PhD mentor, and I was co-mentored by Buzz Swanek. And so, it was a perfect hybrid of their research, whereas Buzz did a lot of ACL research, and he found that, those with lower neurocognitive or executive function were more likely to tear your ACL. And so you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? And then, Tom had kind of worked with some people and they were finding, hey, concussions associated with lower extremity injury. And, they looked at it just cross sectionally, just kind of looking at like, yes, no, in the last year, have you had a concussion? Have you had a lower extremity injury? So not quite actually getting at the order effect. And they were like, yep, wow, people with concussion more likely to have a lower extremity injury. And then they did look at it longitudinally, like those who had a concussion were more likely to have a subsequent injury. So it's like, okay. And so then you kind of started to get more and more papers come out. April McPherson published a systematic review on it and found like, hey, all these studies found like 23 studies included those with the concussion are like 2 times more likely to have a lower extremity injury after the concussion. And so it was kind of like, okay, well, why? And that's kind of where Buzz's work came in. And so David Howell had a nice paper on it as well, just kind of getting at why do we think this is happening? And so there's a few theories, and we're still trying to truly get at that mechanistic cause and effect study. But, some think it's lingering subclinical deficits. So, like, you've returned to baseline, right? You're symptom free, you're passing all the concussion tests, but maybe there's something there that we're not seeing on these tests because they're not super sensitive. And so they think, hey, it's reduced executive function. So, kind of getting at what Buzz was getting at. Um, Neuromuscular control and like dual task dysfunction. And so that's kind of what we did a lot of, is like dual tasks. So we would do stuff like walking heel toe while subtracting by 7, or spelling 5-letter words backwards. And so what we were seeing is that even though people were clinically recovered, they were not returning to baseline on those dual task metrics. And so it's like, okay, this might be something. And so, like, the example I always give is like, what is sport if not dual and triple task, right? So to bring all three of those concepts together, right? It's not just going up for a layup, right? I'm going up for the layup. My brain is telling myself I'm going to land in 0.7 seconds, and I need to land with a flex knee and a flexed hip and absorb this impact. I'm watching the defender as well, and I need to be prepared, and I need to have appropriate muscle tone and joint stiffness so that I can absorb this landing. And what happens? You have this dual task dysfunction, this neuromuscular control error, and you land with a extended knee and a flexed hip, and you tear your ACL, right? Like, it's kind of like when you're so it's like that sensory prediction error, right? When you go down the stairs and you don't realize there's one more step or something, and you have that like, oh shit moment, right? So you landed with inappropriate joint stiffness and muscle tone, and it was a low risk scenario on the staircase, because hopefully you're holding the handrail. But on the basketball court, when it's a 3-foot drop, or it's a landing on someone's ankle, or it's on a football field and you're cutting or something, that's a high risk scenario, and maybe you get that ankle sprain or that ACL tear or something like that. And so, we replicated that throughout my doctorate in ROTC populations, so Reserve Officer Training Corps Cadets. So those are people that are contracted, they're going through college, and they will commission as officers in the military. And then we did it for part of my dissertation. We had about 1,000 rugby players participate, and same thing, we just kind of cross-sectional, yes, no, those with history of concussion, do you have a history of lower extremity? And we went and expanded that further to NFL populations. So we took publicly available NFL data, found the same, we actually didn't find it. And I think some of that was that it was just a 17-week season. The exposure wasn't there long enough to get the injury. And then, I got to my postdoc, and I was like, I'm really interested in this. Like, there's something there, I think this dual task, and I really view gait as like the sixth vital sign. Like, there was a paper years ago that coined that term, and I love it. I think gait tells us a lot about health. And so, because it correlates so well with like quality of life, cognitive function, physical function, so on and so forth. And so I said, how do we do this with TBI? Like, not just sport concussion, because, a sport concussion is an injury of privilege, right? And I mean that in the nicest way, right? Like, you were able-bodied enough to play sports, and you had the access to play sports, whether that's money, time, energy, resources. And in doing so, you suffered a concussion, right? Like, that is an injury of privilege. A traumatic brain injury, a mild traumatic brain injury, whatever severity you want to go with, typically doesn't have that privilege, right? It is an elderly fall. It is a car accident. It is intimate partner violence. It is gunshot violence. It is what have you, right? It is my student in the hallway yesterday who threw on a backpack that was too heavy, and they flipped ass over tea kettle and hit their head on the concrete. And I was like, I can't believe I just witnessed that. Off to student health you go, So, like, it's just like, holy smokes. And so not everybody has the benefit of an athletic trainer or a sports medicine staff ready to recover you. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like, our athletes are getting injured after the fact, and they're rehabbing. So what's happening to the general pop, And so that was kind of my transition away from sports. Is I was like, sports are great, but it's privilege, right? It's the small percentage of people that are engaging in it. So with Andrea Schneider and my postdoc, we did a lot of work with the ERIC study, and that's the atherosclerosis risk in communities. So that was started in 1985. across 4 different sites in the country, and they recruited about 13,000 participants to follow them longitudinally. They come in every year, and they do telephone visits, they do assessments every year, and they have since the 80s, which has been awesome. And so we've got all these cool data on them, and we also have hospitalization and ED data as well. So I said, okay, well, we're not going to have ACL tear on these data, but we know if they've had a TBI. And so then I was like, wait, we have hospitalization data. So like, let's pull the ICD code for fall. Like you had a fall. And people typically think of you have a fall and you get a TBI, right? You fall and hit your head. And I was like, well, let's go back to the reverse, right? Like, what is a fall but a lower extremity dysfunction, a motor control error and a fall, right? So you had a trip, you had a slip, right? You didn't dorsiflex your foot enough, so you tripped. And so I was like, all right, let's look at it. So we looked at, did people with TBI have a fall, and were they more likely to fall compared to those without TBI? And yeah, same exact thing existed. So it was like 30 years of follow-up data, and it was just right at that like 5-year mark, you saw that separation. So like individuals with TBI were more likely to fall. And so that's, I think really interesting with that older adult population, because those are the ones getting the TBIs for whatever mechanism. And then really a fall in an older adult is like a death sentence, right? Like it's a fall, it's a hip fracture, it's a hospitalization, it's a pneumonia, and unfortunately it's passing away, right? All just because of that fall. So I'm like, okay, like let's go back to secondary, primary, tertiary prevention. Like if we could rehab the brain injury and think about, okay, how do we make sure that your dual task function's appropriate and your neuromuscular control is appropriate, we can maybe prevent that fall. So I think that was kind of interesting. And now we've even branched into other directions and gone, okay, concussion and upper extremity injury. And we found an association there in the rugby players as well. And we're doing it in the ROTC population now, as well as an NFL population. So those are all manuscripts in preparation. So, I'll leave a little teaser there, but it's all kind of related, I think. And so I think it's pretty interesting. And I think it's been fun to kind of get into that general population and older adults, because that's kind of really where my heart's always been. Like my undergrad focus was on therapeutic and rehabilitative medicine and geriatrics. And so it's kind of been nice to kind of do some stuff with older adults. So now we're actually looking at that mechanism. And now we're saying, okay, with people, if their dual task gait worsens over time, are they more likely to fall compared to those without? And does TBI accelerate that risk, or does it accelerate that gait decline? So that's kind of what we're working on now, which is going to be fun.
It's interesting that you had brought up concussions as a injury of, what did you say it was? It was an injury of
Privileged, yeah.
privilege. And it's funny you say that, because I never really thought about that, but I'm like, yeah, you're completely right. And we always think about that with respect to the NFL, that basically any NFL week, I think we just passed like week 3 of the season, and I was like
Hmm.
looking at all the updates, and it's like, oh, this team won, this team's injured, this team's injured. And it's like, you see like the musculoskeletal injuries, and you're like, okay. And like, then I start to think, okay, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Because you can basically bank most of your money that every one of those players on the field has had at least one, if not 2 or 3 concussions, and they're all just getting these huge musculoskeletal injuries. And you can think, oh, okay, fine. Like, CD Lamb is out for 2 weeks with like a busted
Hmm.
ankle. He'll come back. But I'm like, what preempted that specific ankle injury? Or Dak Prescott, or,
Yeah.
he's always like breaking a finger or something like that. And I'm like, oh, like what happened first? And even too, it's like, I remember my mom, she's a cancer survivor, luckily, but she had way too many rounds of chemo 15 years ago,
Mm,
and she went through early menopause and had a
right.
stroke. And then from that, she had a bunch of musculoskeletal injuries in the next 10 years, because she was just like, her proprioceptive senses were off, her
Mm,
central communication was down, like she didn't have a lot of like afferent communication coming back to the brain, and she was just off kilter. And now I'm like really thinking about that. I'm like, holy cow, because as you're saying, in these older folks, not only are they osteoporotic and sarcopenic, and maybe they're dealing with some mild cognitive impairment, but now if they do fall, maybe they've had concussions in the past, or now they do have a TBI, it's like, it's a positive feedback mechanism. And what do we do about
eh,
that?
yeah, like it's such a perfect storm, right? Like they have quite literally everything's working against them. And it's unfortunate too, because you think those are the people, right? let's just go 45, let's go even younger, right? You're 45 to 75-year-olds and they get a TBI for whatever mechanism caused it. Um, they're not focused on rehab. They're not they are mom, dad, doctor, lawyer, teacher, like I don't have time to go to physical therapy. I don't have time to go to occupational therapy or whatever. And so the barriers are just systemic across the board. And so it's like, we have direct access physical therapy in a lot of states, and the degree of direct access is varying state to state, whether it's 30 days, 3 visits, whatever. And people still don't know that. They think I need a physician referral to go to PT, or they go, why would I go to a PT for a concussion? They're not a neurologist or something like that, and why do I need to go to occupational therapy? And they think, well, I feel better, so I'm okay. And I think that goes back to those subclinical deficits where it's like, it's there. It's just a matter of what's going to elicit it. And like in sport, it's probably being elicited because you're doing 17 things at once. And, sometimes there is just the incidental, right? You get injured because someone just twisted you the wrong way. Like it wasn't necessarily your fault or a motor control error. But, like these people are getting injured and they got all the resources available. So it's like we're really doing a disservice to the population. And it's like, think about all the healthcare claims. Like, I would much rather pay for somebody as an insurance company to go do rehab than have a fall and get hospitalized with a hip fracture and need to go get surgery or this and that. And I think we're seeing a shift towards that, hopefully. Ideally, if I could just put a 30-minute walk a day, drink some water, and get 7 to 9 hours of sleep a day and in a pill, I'd be rich. But I haven't figured that out yet. And so it's like, it sounds silly, but it's like the basic stuff works. And it's like we don't prioritize that. And we know that humans respond to incentive and not punishment, right? That's why you see that with like smoking cessation, right? They respond better to, hey, we'll pay for you to do this program, as opposed to, well, we'll take away a vacation day if you smoke. Like
Hmm.
they're more likely to respond to the incentive. And so I really think you're going to see that. And I forget what maybe you know the answer. I forget what country was doing it. It was like Switzerland or Sweden. One of the Western European countries was actually like allowing you to bill insurance for like personal training. And I just think that's brilliant. Like, I'm
Yeah.
like, I would love for that to hit the US market, right? Like, in the worlds of musculoskeletal injuries, right? Like, how many people go see a chiropractor, right? Because they know chiropractors are direct access. And like, it's like the perfect American thing, right? Like, I get to see you right away when I want to see you. I don't have to do anything. It's passive, and then I feel better. Immediate gratification. Like, it's so violently American versus like, oh, physical therapy, maybe there's a barrier. Maybe I need to have an appointment schedule. I can't just walk in. Maybe I need a referral. And then you're making me be active. I have to have ownership of this. You're making me do the external rotation or the banded internal rotations, and I have to work, and I'm not going to see results or feel immediately better today. Like, that is the antithesis of what the average American wants, right? And so it's like, oh gosh, like we need to find a way to incentivize going to that physical therapy or that rehabilitation, or whether it's cardiac rehab, pulmonary rehab, whatever, cognitive rehab, like, because we know it works. It just takes time. And so it's similar with personal training, right? Like, you're not going to look like a Greek god just by going to one session, right? You got to commit, and you need to have that chronic adaptations. And so, that's why I'll never be president, because I'm going to sit here and say, let's promote physical activity in positive ways.
It's funny you said that with incentivizing versus punishing. I was reading this book recently, and the author was like a big like behavioral researcher, and what they were saying is that if you want to be like the best parent ever and get your kids to um, be kind, be patient, make friends, do well in school, like you should always be giving them feedback and just say like, hey, instead of like I'm going to take this away, and if you don't stop, I'm going to make you do this. You'll be in timeout. You say, hey, if you can sit down and eat dinner like a big boy or big girl, tomorrow you can watch 10 more minutes of TV, or you can stay up
Right.
10 minutes later. And kids like even at 5 like respond so much better to that positive incentivizing than like to the negative stuff. And it's funny because like, I mean, you played sports all your life and you've coached sports, you've worked with athletes, and it's like the amount of like kind of, punishments or beat downs we've gotten from doing the sprints and the plyometric workouts and the suicides and no water breaks. It's like, that's not helping me shoot a better free throw. What's going to help me shoot a better free throw is like doing more free throw practice and you saying like, hey, maybe you'll get an extra 5 minutes of playing time, or like, I'll get your favorite flavor Gatorade tomorrow if you can practice an extra 10 minutes, or I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's true, right? Like in all aspects of the world, right? I think parenting's like one of the best examples. You see that all the time, and especially with kids, right? Like they don't have a frontal lobe yet, not till they're like 25, right? Like I do that all the time. Like you have to make them think that they won, right? Like, and you can't surprise them, right? So it's like, hey, do you want to leave the pool now or in 5 minutes? Like, oh, 5 minutes. I've won. So then when 5 minutes comes, there's no fight and you leave and you go home. Versus if you say we're leaving now, it's tears, 5 more minutes, right? Like I think we're human. Like it's nothing about their personality. It's just we respond very well to incentives across the
How is how have you really bridged this gap, seeing as that like you're a huge concussion TBI researcher and you have a huge vested interest in something like rugby? I mean, rugby is like so intense. What does that look like for you as like the scientist, the researcher, but you still like very much enjoying this sport, which is very intense?
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard, it's really, I don't want to say it's ethically hard, it's emotionally hard, right? Like I love the game and I'm always going to love the game. It's brought so much to my world. And it's a great community of people. I could wear a rugby shirt anywhere in the country and someone's going to buy me a drink and say, "Hey, I played rugby," or "Hey, my kid plays rugby," or "I just watched the World Cup and that's really fantastic," and I'm all for any level of physical activity. And so it's hard because I get this question a lot is like, what sport should my kid play? And it goes back to like liars figure and figures lie. So I tell them, I'm like, well, what answer are you looking for? Right? They're usually looking for something. They want you to say, "Hey, football's safe. Tell my wife that, my kid can play." Or they want me to say, "Oh, football sucks. Tell my wife or tell my husband that, our son's not playing football," or whatever. And so the joke we always used to give at Delaware was, you know, rowing had 100% concussion rate one year. I was like, what? I'm like, yes, rowing kills, right? Right? Like rowing is a killer. And it's like, wait, what? And like, you're laughing because it's like, yeah, off that, the BS meter is going off. You're like 100% concussion rate. Like there's no way. And, like your story is only as good as your data and you have to dig into the data. So what happened? Oh, rowing was carrying their boat. They tripped on a root and they dropped their boat on their head. All six of them got a concussion. Ergo, 100% concussion rate. So I know that that was a fluke. I don't think rowing's a high risk for brain injury, but I could sit there and give you that statistic and scare you, right? And so, same goes for football, right? You sit there and you go, oh, they had 27 concussions this year. Well, when you have 150 people on roster, like that happens, and ideally the number is zero, but there's exposures to be had. And then, so then we try to say, okay, well, let's present the data as athletic exposure. So one player at one game is an athletic exposure. And so when you do that, you see rugby has some of the highest levels of concussion per athletic exposure. And even that kind of lies too, right? So it's like, oh man, like it's like football, right? Like, is the punter at high risk for a brain injury? Probably not. Is the third string quarterback probably at high risk? Probably not. But you sit there and you lump them in and you say, yeah, well, there's a chance that every 3 games somebody gets a concussion. And it's like, well, I don't think that guy's risk is the same as that guy's. And so the things just get muddy. And so I always just kind of tell people is my goal is not to get rid of sport. My goal is to make sport safer. So how do we keep playing rugby, keep playing hockey, keep playing football, and keep it safe, right? And so is that, hey, we do less contact practices? Is that, hey, we start at a later age? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm trying to find those answers, and unfortunately, we do a lot of science now where we say, here's what these data say, But, we won't really know for 50 years, right? Like we need to follow up in 50 years and see where they're at. We need to follow up and I'm going to retire before 50 years from now. So like I want an answer now. And so I think that's where it gets hard is we kind of sub in lower quality studies to try to provide preliminary answers, but the answer is not going to be for 40, 50 years, right? It's like when you look at some of the CTE stuff, right? Like you go, okay, yeah, this looks bad. And then you go, okay, well, this person played 40 years ago and the equipment was poor. They played through the concussions. They probably had second impact syndrome. Oh, and by the way, they also had these other cerebrovascular risk factors like drinking, smoking, substance misuse. They were sedentary. They weren't getting good sleep, or they had high LDL cholesterol, high triglycerides, mismanaged diabetes, whatever you want to throw in there. And so I think it's really hard is you're going to have to sit there and go, okay, well, the people that played 10 years ago and when they got a concussion, they managed their injury appropriately. They rehabbed, they sat out, they did a return to play program. 70 years from now when they die, what's their brain look like? Like, I'm not going to know for 70 years. So that's what sucks is you're trying to make policy decisions. And again, you're only as good as your data. So you have to accept, okay, maybe that data is biased really far in that direction. This data is biased and really far in this direction. So like, how do we accept the limitations and say, okay, this has sampling bias, this has recruitment bias, and this we just need to wait to answer. And so I think it's hard. I think you'll see rule changes in sports where they say, oh, well, we're going to ban this and do that. And in rugby, you have 3 reasons for a rule change: fairness, safety, or TV. And a lot of the times you get a rule change for good TV. And that's hard. It's really, really hard. Like at the international level right now, they say, oh, if you get a red card, you just sit out for 20 minutes. Before it was a send off, you were done for the game. And I think it's hard because I really think you need that send off to disincentivize, right? Like you're getting a red card because you just did a high force shoulder charge to the head. Like that's dangerous, and I think when you don't get sent off, it's not much punishment, so I don't know. But then that goes back to the punishment versus reward. I don't know. Yeah, right.
We need
So
to incentivize like clean rugby.
yeah, so that's what I'm saying, right? So I feel like the punishment is the incentivized. Yeah, right. That's incentivized clean rugby. You get to stay on the field. So yeah, it's really hard. You'll get people send me videos of like nasty hits, and then the referee in me is, I'm like, oh well, that's a red card. Like, they're like, oh, rugby's so dangerous. I'm like, well, those types of hits shouldn't happen, but they do. And yeah, like, what do you do there's only so much you can prevent, right? Like, do I tell people to stop playing basketball because people tear their ACL? Like, no, but can we try to lower their ACL injury risk? Yeah, let's do that. Or can we make sure that if they do tear their ACL, that they make an informed decision about whether to return to sport or not? And I think that's the other aspect of it. Not to just carry on at a diatribe, but it's we always say, like, if you remove football or you remove rugby, what is the 220-pound high school boy playing? He's not joining the gymnastics team. He's not, maybe he's throwing shot put. I don't know. He's not joining the soccer team. He's not joining cross country. Maybe he is, but football and rugby gives that larger, heavier individual a place. And when they have a place to play sports, they are now physically active 5 to 6 days a week. They are now socially active 5 to 6 days a week. They have a social support system, right? I'm blocking for the quarterback. I'm in the scrum with the other 7 guys or gals, right? Those are my buddies, right? We've got plans Friday night because we're all going to hang out, or we're going to have a pasta party and go to our game Saturday. So they are socially engaged. That's good for their mental health, their anxiety, their depression. They are physically active 6 days a week. Great. So they are hitting all of the guidelines for improvements in cardiovascular health, improvements in muscular fitness, and that's all good. So they're reducing their disease burden early, and they're making good habits young of being physically active, right? And if you remove those sports where they have a role, and now they're not playing a sport. Now they're sedentary, right? And we know how bad sedentarism is. It's probably worse than not meeting the physical guidelines, right? Like I'd rather you just make sure you get up and move than sit all day, right? And now they're not socially engaged. They don't have friends. Maybe they're isolated because high schoolers are cruel and middle schoolers are cruel, right? So now their anxiety is up. Now their depression's up. Now their mental health's not great. And so I think it's really hard. Like it's like, how do we keep these sports so that we can promote the physical activity? So it's been nice to see like the flag footballs and your touch rugbies and things like that. Um, so I think it's just a matter of how do you manage it without letting it get too far in either direction.
Is the with respect to the NFL and like NCAA, I know the NFL is taking really huge steps right now. Even within the past like 2 or 3 seasons, things are changing drastically. Like a lot of like the kickoff is different. The
Right.
halo helmets, they're even like wearing like that collar to like stabilize the neck. Like, what do you think about these things happening so drastically? Do you think they're positive? Do you think they move the needle in a very, very small way, maybe very, very big way, or do we not have enough data to suggest that they're
All the above.
efficacious? Okay.
Yeah, so
You've
I
been
think
playing the part of such an honest scientist where you're just like, oh, the
yeah.
data this, the data that. And it's beautiful because you're being an honest scientist as opposed to
Yeah.
trying to be like an expert who knows everything. I'm like, no, you're very honest about this.
Yeah. The smartest person you'll ever meet, right, is the one that says I don't know enough to have an opinion on that,
It's
right?
like
Or
the Socratic method. Just keep asking
it is,
questions.
right? Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's all the PhD does, right? The PhD tells you that you know nothing, but you know how to find it, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, so I don't know the answer, I'm going to find out for you. Um, yeah, so I think it's so hard too, like socially and ethically, right? So, so you come out with these guardian caps and you come out with these, the Q collars or this and that, and inevitably what happens now is every Pop Warner league, every middle school football, every high school football or rugby, and they say, my kid needs this. If the NFL's doing it, why aren't we? Like these are the people at risk. Like their brains are developing. And so then it becomes like this like silver bullet where they feel like if they don't have it, they're unsafe. Um, and I think that's really dangerous, right? Like one, now you're asking people to spend money and that sucks. That's a barrier, right? That is a regressive tax, right? $150 to you is a different proportion of your income than $150 to me. And so that sucks. And then, some of these materials are not founded in good science and are not supported by good science. And so it's really hard when you see, oh, my favorite player is wearing this, so maybe I should do it. And so I will say, like the Guardian caps, a lot of the data don't support it. The simplest way of explaining things, right? Think of water in a water bottle. If you shake the bottle, what happens on the inside? The water still sloshes, right? If I wrap this bottle in styrofoam and I shake it, it still sloshes, right? So, the concept is it's there to help decelerate, right? Which is good. But the flip side, right? Think about force equals ma and inertia. You have now increased the radius. So, and you've also increased the mass. When you increase the mass, you increase the force. So there's like a trade-off too. And so a lot
Is
of
it
the
the
lab,
second law?
yeah, right,
Force equals ma.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, or every action is an equal opposite reaction.
Yeah. The
Someone will have
inverse
to
of the
fact
top
check me
trait.
on those. Yeah. Um, and so I think, so that's kind of hard too. And then you go, oh, well, neck strengthening is going to be the winner. Okay, great. You can have the strongest neck in the world. If you don't activate it, it's useless. Right. So think about when you see those mechanisms in football, quarterback gets blindside tackle, whiplash, right? So it's like his neck wasn't activated. Doesn't matter how strong his neck was, you know? And so I think that's where it gets hard is like you create all these products. And I always joke, I'm like, if I didn't have any morals, like I would just be like using my PhD title and just like selling snake oil. I'd be like, here's this device and here's your BCAAs and your electrolyte tabs, and I'm going to make all this money and put doctor in front of it. But unfortunately, I have morals and I'm not going to do that. And so I think it's really hard is like you're taking advantage of scared and vulnerable parents, right? I remember getting a concussion in high school, my first one, And my dad was like, "How do I get a helmet on this basketball player?" And like he was terrified, right? He was like, I don't know what's going to happen, and how do we prevent this, and what do we do?" And um, like as a parent, you'll do anything to protect your kid. And so I think it's hard, is like, and you see this in every field. It's not just concussions, right? Like you see the kids wanting to wear all the sweatbands, or they want to wear the high socks or the ankle braces because that's what that basketball player does. And, they're not wearing it because they're recovering from an ankle injury, but it's, guy I like does it, so I do it. And so I think that's hard, right? Like, and so, yeah, I think you just have to, the NFL is doing the best with what they can, right? They're going to try everything. They're going to throw everything at the board because they are on the big stage. The problem is what they do is going to trickle down. So then the middle school in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, is going to say, well, the NFL's doing it, we should do it. And then it's like, well, how are you paying for that? And is it worth it? And so, I think that's where it gets dicey and ugly too. And it's like, I think, it's a billion-dollar industry for a reason. So, and I think the data are not there to support majority of these things. There is nothing that is shown to prevent a concussion, other than not being exposed. Like, right, like there's no silver bullet in the concussion world, unfortunately. And so I think it's fine to keep trying these things, but it's also important to understand when it isn't proven and it's not backed by science. So save your dollars where you can and control what you can control. And, you can control your fitness, you can control your exposures to an extent. And so I give the NFL credit. They're trying, they know that there's an issue with concussion, and a lot of that stemmed from like lack of reporting and identification. And now they nail that, right? They're getting it, right? And they have the mandatory stand down. So they're trying their best, but then I think the flip side is they have every resource in the world. And so it's hard to make a concussion decision off of that when it's majority of our concussions and mild traumatic brain injuries are just everyday living and car accidents, intimate partner violence, and falls and what have you.
It kind of like, it makes me feel a little bit conflicted when I watch the NFL, because I'm a huge Eagles fan. I love the
Right.
Birds, and I see, like, the NFL is like, slowly creeping their way to different continents. They're going to,
Yeah.
parts of Europe. They're going to Central America, South America. And I'm like, awesome. And then I'm like, okay. Listen. If you want to play football and you want to make 10, $20 million a year, that's more than most people can even fathom. You say, like, how many zeros is that? Like, and for me, I'm
Right.
like, I don't know. Like, if I could have any job in the world, I feel like I would just be a backup quarterback,
A third string quarterback for sure.
because the league
Yeah.
minimum is like $700,000. I'm like, if you can get that gig for 10 years and you're watching like front row seats, you're flying first class in like your own team jet, you have the best meals ever, and you're bringing in millions of dollars, I'd be like, yeah, and I'm never going to touch the field and I'm never going to get an injury. I would do that. I don't really
Oh my
want to be
gosh,
where that
right?
hurts, because I don't want to
Get
like,
part of the pension program, right? Do 3 years in the league, get in that pension program. Yeah, like that's the dream gig, right?
yeah. And like, I don't know. I'm afraid for those folks. And even too, like, I'm a big WWE fan because my brother works with Netflix Live. And so
Cool.
I've watched WWE. I see these people doing flips off like the top turnbuckle, and they're smashing people over tables. And my friends and I are like, like, they're gonna get hurt. And I'm like, hey, you're making a few $1 million a year, and if that's your choice, that's your choice. But I love like the way that you put it, is like, we're gonna have that trickle down. What can we do for the middle schoolers, the high schoolers, the parents, to make sure they're not really emulating, without safety precautions, those folks at the top who have made that decision as a 20, 30-year-old to say, hey, this is my career. It's even with like something like PEDs. It's like, listen, like, you have to make a very, very tough decision, but please, have a prefrontal cortex in
Right.
order to make those decisions.
Oh, I know. Yeah, and you're seeing that, right? Like, like I think the Oklahoma drill, I think, was the big one in football, where it's like the kids would just like full speed bash each other, and it was like, okay, like that's banned, guys. Like, why are we doing that, right? And I think we're starting to see that self-reflection, right? Like, what is the purpose of this drill? Okay, like, does running full speed at each other for tackling and ball carrying happen a lot in football? So why are we doing it? And why are we making everybody doing it? Right. So let's eliminate that head injury risk factor. Boom. You know, Oh, we're just going to tackle for 2 hours at practice. Okay, why? And also we know, like, again, there's more data. So like, let's make informed strength and conditioning decisions, right? Okay, so we know that your tackle efficiency um, decreases after, X number of exposures. So like your form's going to fail. And when your form fails, what happens? Oh, you tackle too high and now you take a knee to the head, or you take a shoulder to the ball carrier's head, right? Because you've been tired. And so it's like, I always tell people from like a strength and conditioning perspective, like, you have to sit there and go, why am I doing this? And is this doing what I hope it's doing? And it goes to everything, right? Teaching, right? The objective of today's lesson is that you understand the brachial plexus. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to do. And then you're going to go through and, well, why'd you talk about the knee? The goal was brachial plexus. Oh, okay, yeah, you're right. So let me reevaluate that. And you don't quite get that at the youth level, unfortunately, because there's no money, right? So who's coaching youth football? It's whatever parent was available to help. Like, I'm from Illinois, and in Illinois, if somebody employed at the high school wants the coaching job, they get it. It doesn't matter if they're qualified or not. And so, like, sometimes you get the guy or gal that played one season of middle school football and they're the JV football coach because we needed to hire somebody. And if nobody wants the job, then they can seek external applicants. But it's like, that's why you get the guy that played or gal that played one term of basketball and now they're your basketball coach and they're telling you run suicides until you puke, or they're telling you you're going to do this and that. And you're like, okay, well, what's the goal of this activity, right? Is the goal to improve cardiorespiratory fitness? And is that doing that? Is the goal to improve, shooting when tired? Is it doing that? I don't know. And so that's where it gets hard, is I think it's like, if we can really get grassroots and say like, okay, like, let's limit this head injury exposure. Like, there's not really a benefit to just bashing heads in, and like, why do we do that? And there's going to be inherent head injury risk, and there's going to be inherent musculoskeletal injury risk. But I think it's just we're more sensitive to the brain because you're like, well, I can get a knee replacement. Well, I can live without my elbow, but it's like, you do have one brain. And so I think we are still pushing to kind of be better. And how do we manage this appropriately? And I do think, like, down the road, 50, 60 years, when we get these postmortem autopsies and we see people who did get a brain injury and it was rehabbed appropriately, I do think that that brain's going to look a lot better than the 60-year-old brains that we're looking at now who played through their brain injuries. Like, it's no different than musculoskeletal injuries, right? If you tear your rotator cuff and you never get it surgically repaired and you just keep doing the same thing over again, yeah, it's probably going to look like ground beef in there. Versus the person who tears the rotator cuff, they get surgery and they rehab it and they do it, it's going to probably look pretty good. Um, and then versus the person who did all the things and never tore that rotator cuff, it's going to look even great. So I think that's kind of where we're at with concussions, is we're like having this shift where eventually we'll probably get along the musculoskeletal injury world, where like, yeah, like, okay, if it does happen, hopefully it doesn't, but if we rehab it, you're probably going to be okay. And I think that's where media and uh, our messaging is really important too. Like, it is important to sit out and it is important to rehab, and it's not about just rub some dirt in it. And I think we're seeing that shift, right? We all played for that coach that, like, you just got your bell rung, get back in there. And it's like, oh, that was very dangerous. Shouldn't have done that. And so I think we're getting better, but it's not quite there because it's still something, it's a hidden injury, right? I can see that you're on crutches. You can't see that I have a headache. You can't see that my brain is upset and I'm having this neurometabolic cascade. And so I almost wish I could just like tattoo on people's like heads, like, recovering brain injury here, like, be nice. Like, there was a book I read years ago, it's like The Ghost Inside Me. It was like a computer science professor and he had a persistent concussion symptoms, and he like talked about a time where he was outside maybe mowing the yard or somebody, and somebody hit the brakes really hard on the neighboring road, and the screech it just got him something fierce, and he was like in the fetal position on his yard because it just, he couldn't process it, the acoustics of it. And someone's looking at him thinking like he was a crazy man. And it was just like, nobody knew, like, yeah, recovering brain injury, and I think that's part of it is like we're getting better, but I think there's still a lot of room for improvement. And that goes across the fields, like not just athletics, like return to learn, return to driving. And there's some great people leading those efforts, but it's still not there, right? Like I see it with my students that get a concussion and they're like, "Oh, I just showed up to school the next day and flunked my exam and that sucks." And I'm like, "What?" Like, where was your accommodations? Where was your return to learn program? Like, I'm like, okay, like, so we're getting there, Mike. It's the long and short of it. We're getting there. We're trying.
I love hearing like you talk at length about this because we need more people like that in that fight. We don't need people saying, "Oh, rub some dirt on it." We need the honest, empathetic scientists to get folks back out there. And it's funny that you brought up your students because I've had several students as well, athletes, and I would rather get those emails and say, "Hey, can you accommodate this student for maybe showing up late or they're going to need to leave or like if you have to record the lecture because like they're really, sensitive to lights and they're getting nauseous and maybe dealing with dizziness, confusion, whatever it is." I'd rather have to accommodate them than to take the white knuckle approach because yeah, I mean, I'm seeing this at 18, 19 years old and by that point, I mean, you're legally an adult. They're dealing with if they have to drop out a semester, that hurts their confidence, it hurts their GPA, it hurts their, you know, even just like physically and cognitively, like how bad was it? Like what's the incidence of happening again? And then like the coaches, maybe the parents are like, "Oh, like this is your scholarship. We want you to get back out on the field." And we began this discussion talking about like, a concussion or a, TBI bringing upon a musculoskeletal injury. And for me, I'm like, hey, I'm not your parent, but as someone who's involved in science, you're 18, 19. If you're not already like on ESPN and you have an NIL deal, maybe look long term and say, hey, do you want to have a family? Do you want to give back to your community? Do you want to live a long life that's not filled with a lot of chronic pain and dizziness and vertigo?
Right.
Maybe give those things some thought because the idea of you being in the NFL or you being a professional athlete probably isn't going to come true. And if it does, you're only going to be in the league for like 3.3 years or something. Like, yeah, maybe you should focus on being the best that you can be outside of that.
Right. Ain't that the truth? Well, and I think there's like, there's the social stigma too. Like I think you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of people don't know that they can get an accommodation. And then even trying to get the accommodation, people think it's like some scarlet letter of like, I'm stupid, I'm less than. And I tell my students all the time, I'm like, accommodations provide access, not success. Okay. So this is just, it goes back to like equality versus equity almost. Like this is making it equitable. Okay. Whether you need it for a week or you need it for your entire collegiate career because maybe you have ADHD, you have a learning disability, you have dyslexia, dyscalculia, whatever it may be, or you need to go sit in a quiet room and you take assessments. Fine. Like I want it so that you have an equitable access of success as everybody else. And so it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And yeah, so it's like I think just, like there's good people making those fights and saying like, hey, we need a return to learn program and we need somebody to advocate for themselves because at the end of the day, like from a research perspective, the IRB will view individuals with TBI as a vulnerable population with the argument that, yeah, you're cognitively impaired, acutely or chronically, whatever it may be. And so how are we going to sit there and say, oh, yeah, this person who's deemed cognitively impaired and vulnerable is allowed and appropriate to say, I don't need an accommodation. I know what I'm doing. Like, but you don't, right? Like, or maybe you think you know. And so, yeah, I'm always telling my students, I'm like, okay, like, yeah, no, we're going to get that accommodation. And a lot of that just stems from like making sure people know that it's out there and that it's an option too, right? Like, I never got an accommodation in high school for when I was concussed and I paid for it. Like same in grad school, I got rear-ended at a red light and they were like, "Oh, do you want to take your like final later?" And I was like, "No, I just want it done." And like I got my first B ever as a result and I'm still bitter. But like I was like, "Oh my gosh, like why did I do that? Like why did I tough it out?" And it was just also like people didn't know. Like there was nobody to advocate for me and I didn't know how to advocate for myself at that age. And so I think you just have to keep pushing to uplift others in every aspect.
Absolutely. Where would you like to see the research go with respect to concussion and TBI over the next 5 to 10 years? It seems like it's progressing, but what if I'm going to give you $10 to $20 million in grant funding out of thin air?
Yeah.
Where do you put it?
Ooh, that's interesting. So I don't know. Like, because that's like pie in the sky, right? Like I could do whatever I want. What would I do? So again, like I'm thinking like what's going to have the biggest public health impact. So like, okay, here's my hot take. It's not hot. It's so lukewarm, Mike. So I come from, like a cardiac rehab background, right? So you're going to get a little history lesson here, right? So cardiac rehab, in the 60s, we said, okay, people are dying after they have their heart attacks, so we're going to put them on bed rest for 6 weeks. Gosh, people are still dying. So they say, okay, fine, bed rest for 3 weeks, sit upright in a chair for 3 weeks. They said, gosh, they are still dying. And so then, eventually we got to what is now cardiac rehab, right? You have a heart attack. We are doing exercise the next day, right? You are going to be doing, you're going to get an exercise prescription. We're going to do a stress test, or maybe we're going to do a stress echo or something, and we are going to prescribe exercise. And you're going to do phase 1 cardiac rehab in the hospital. When you're discharged, you're going to do phase 2. So you're going to get 36 sessions covered by insurance, and you're going to go exercise 3 days a week. And, with the goal of seeing like 10% improvements in your MET capacity, right? So we had this paradigm shift, right? Where laying in bed was doing too little after a heart attack. Maybe running a marathon the next day after your heart attack's too much. So we found the Goldilocks zone, right? Everything in physiology is this inverted U, right? There's too much of a good thing, too little. We found the sweet spot. And you're seeing that now in concussion, right? So John Letty really led this charge out of Buffalo, where he basically copy pasted cardiac rehab, where he said, maybe playing football the next day or wrestling or rugby after your concussion's bad, right? Second impact syndrome, might die. Don't do that. But cocoon therapy and sit in a dark room till you feel better is not working either, right? Like I think of it like the pink elephant, right? Go sit in your bedroom. Don't think about your headache. Don't think about your symptoms. What are you going to do? My headache. Like you take you and me right now, healthy, and put us in a dark room and socially isolate us. And I come out of that room, I'm going to be sensitive to light. I'm going to be anxious. I'm going to be irritable. Boom. Do I have a concussion? Because I just listed 3 symptoms of a concussion right there. So we realized like that cocoon therapy was too little. That was making it worse. And now we said, okay, we're going to do the Buffalo treadmill test, which is it's basically like a Bruce test practically. Like it is, it's a cardiac graded exercise test. And we're going to find out at what heart rate are you getting symptoms, or are your symptoms getting worse? Great. We're going to prescribe exercise based upon 90% of that heart rate. You're going to do symptom limited exercise and progress through as you return to play. And boom, what do you know? Exercise is medicine, right? You stimulate the brain, you increase blood flow, you know, open up that, all the cerebral vasculature. That's good things. And people return to play sooner, return to work sooner, return to learn sooner compared to, people doing less exercise like stretching or people doing the cocoon therapy. So I love it. Like we're 60 years later, but we caught up to what cardiac rehab did. So my like pie in the sky is that you partner with exercise physiologists like myself, um, in a cardiac rehab setting or something, and you say, boom, you've got a concussion. I'm going to now enroll you in concussion rehab. And it's just going to essentially be cardiac rehab for your brain injury. It's going to be the same exact thing. It says, great, you had a TBI, you 40-year-old, you 60-year-old, you 70-year-old, don't care who you are, you had a TBI, great. You're going to go to this facility run by exercise physiologists. Maybe there's nurses, maybe there's an overseeing physician, maybe there's a physical therapist as well. And you're going to come in 3 days a week and you're going to do symptom limited exercise, and we're going to see how you do it. And insurance is going to cover it, ideally. But like that is like, I would just love, like, I think you'll see it eventually, but I would just love that because we're still so siloed in concussion. And we know it works, right? Like treating vestibular symptoms with vestibular rehab improves vestibular symptoms. Treating your cognitive symptoms with, so on and so forth. And so I would just love to see that interdisciplinary approach come together and say, okay, great. You're going to go to concussion rehab, or you're going to go to brain injury rehab. You're going to go to brain rehab. And it's not just, you know, vestibular ocular motor rehab for, those symptoms is also putting in the aerobic exercise and getting that in, because nobody's gonna do that on their own. They're not gonna do it at home, just like you saw with cardiac rehab. They're gonna be scared, right? They don't want to exercise after their heart attack or after their, um, stent procedure or whatever procedure they had, or their heart failure diagnosis. That's terrifying. So coming to a clinic where it feels medical and it's not just a commercial gym, it feels safe, it feels good. And so I would think the same for concussion rehab. Like, people, and that's why doctors probably prescribe cocoon therapy, because that's easy, that's limited liability. They're not going to sit there and say, well, Mike, you've come in with a brain injury, I'd like you to do symptom limited exercise at 90% of your symptom threshold. And you're going to go, the heck is that? And then when their symptoms worsen because they overdo it, and they call you up and they say, hey, you told me to do this, like, I'm coming for your license, sir. Like, so I think, you need a way to control that liability, but also allow, like, that referral process, and, like, motivate people to do it. Again, that incentivization, like, hey, your insurance covers it, just like cardiac rehab, like, come on and do it. And so I think it would be a really great way to, like, integrate athletic trainers, physiologists, PTs, physicians, and nurses, and, like, rehab concussions and brain injuries. And then, like, going back to that subsequent injury, like, oh, we also integrate some of this, like, maybe we're doing some dual task training, maybe we're doing some motor control, maybe we're doing some neuromuscular control training or assessment, so we can really start to pinpoint, like, where's those subclinical deficits. And, like, just like you would in physical therapy, right? Like, how often do you say, I'm going to rehab my right ankle, and they go, wow, like, you have no mobility on your left ankle, I'm surprised you didn't sprain your left ankle, so now we're going to do both sides here, and, like, everything's going to be really good and kosher.
I love that. I think that I do hope and I do think that we are heading in that direction. Like the idea of like the holistic, approach to these things in lifestyle medicine and all those pillars as far as like sleep, no substance abuse, exercise, nutrition, like a good outlook on life, having a healthy network. Like I do think that we're heading in that direction, hopefully. Um,
Yeah, right.
for those of, but I think it's polarized. I think for those of us who care, we really, really care. And for those who don't, they really, really don't. But
Yeah, oh
I think
yeah.
that even like in our lifetime, I mean, I remember being like a little kid and we used to go to restaurants and they'd say smoking or non-smoking, and my parents would say non-smoking, and that was probably like the early 2000s. This was like maybe 20 years ago, and now I mean you wouldn't think about smoking a cigarette indoors, and cigarette smoking's down. And every single gym, I've belonged to 3 different gyms over the course of the last few years, and I keep like canceling gym memberships and starting new gym memberships because I'm like, oh, every gym is crowded. I'm like, wait, that's a good thing that every gym is crowded so people are
Right, like, I
exercising.
wanted this.
Yeah, like this, like systemically, it's a really healthy thing. But I'm like, can you guys just give me a bench for like the next 20 minutes?
Right, for my own selfish reasons, yeah, like, I would like this.
But I do think it's heading in the right direction, and I commend you for your honesty and your effort on this. Because I remember back in Delaware, you and a bunch of your colleagues, and I guess I can call them my colleagues too, were really interested in all the concussion research and the footfalls and the gait analysis. And I didn't really understand too much of it, but um, you definitely put it in a way which is scientific but also very understandable to the layperson. And I mean, this was wonderful, and I can't wait to keep following along with your journey and what your findings are. And anytime I see something with the NFL, I'm just going to text you and be like, hey, what do you think about this?
Right, right. All I say is, I'm like, "Oh, it's not my patient, I can't comment on them," you know? It's like, keep it that 10-foot pole away. I know. I think, again, it just goes back to, like, I think that's the goal of everyone in this field, right? Whether we did our, you're passionate about physiology and nutrition, and I am too. And I think that's why we all got multiple degrees of exercise science and, kinesiology. And it's just how that's everybody's goal, is how do we make the world healthier and safer? And unfortunately, there's just so many systemic barriers, right? Like, I hate to say it, but I say it all the time. I'm like, running is political, like medicine's political. It is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I'm a runner,
Tylenol is
you're
apparently political. Apparently,
right, right. Like, I'm
medicine's
a
political.
runner and you're a runner too, but it's like, okay, what facilitates me running? I have the ability to pay for running shoes. Like, that's expensive. And when you go through running shoes, like, here's another $150. And then I have a safe, well-lit area to run. It's a safe terrain. There are sidewalks. It is illuminated at night, so I feel safe to light. Oh, well, I work 12-hour shifts, so I can only run in the early morning. Okay, do you feel safe running in the early morning? Well, now you need to go buy reflective gear, and that's another cost. And oh, you have a public park. Who maintains that public park? Great, the municipality, and they use tax dollars to fund the public park and keep the trail safe and clean. And so it's just like you're like, gosh, it's not just simple as like, well, just I don't know why you won't go outside and take a walk. Like, well, because it's not safe to, or like I can only take a walk at night and it's dark. There's no street lamps, or yeah. So it's I think how do we just keep eliminating those barriers? And I think it's again that interdisciplinary approach, right? Like the plan development of your community, right? Like, oh, it's not just little boxes. There's boxes, but there's a running trail, and we make sure that it's well illuminated, and like the science of the built environments. It's just all it's all integrated. So you're like, I think it is beautiful when it does work and it all works together. But it's like we as scientists, we need to get out of our silos and just say like, I need to work with the politician, I need to work with the physical therapist and the dietitian and the insurance company, the devil himself, like it's like you got to play the game and see the change. So it's yeah, I'm with you. I think we just got to keep all fighting the good fight, and it'll get there. I think people see the value of wellness, but it's not just knowing, right? Everybody knows to eat healthy and exercise, but that's not easy, right? So how do we promote that, and how do we make it easier and provide that access and the funds available and teach them, right? Like I always tell people, I'm like, how do you do a push-up? And they're like, oh, you just do a push-up. I'm like, right, nobody taught you how to do a push-up. You just did it. And so if I got 10 people to do a push-up, would they all look the same? No. And so is maybe somebody doing a push-up that's risky and dangerous? Yeah. Okay, so like let's fix that, and so it's like it's simple things like that, like yeah, like how do we teach people how to exercise, how do we teach them to integrate it, or cook on a budget, right? Like I think there's so many awesome social media accounts out there like that are showing like, look, I just got all this at Walmart, it doesn't matter, it's the same. Yes, I'm using frozen vegetables, it's all good, like I just made a home cooked meal, like yeah.
Yeah, even that, God, the barrier for healthy food is what gets me every day. Is like I just got apples, bananas, plums, Greek yogurt, and milk last night. It's just like protein, fiber, nutrient dense foods. And I mean, I got like a big bag of apples and like some plums, whatever. It was like $40.
I knew it, I was like,
And
you're gonna say like 40 bucks. I'm like, oh
yeah, and like thing was like the Greek yogurt was BOGO, so like I got the BOGO there. And the
yeah.
apples like were like I think like 2.89 a pound, but I was like, I mean, bananas are 50 cents a pound, like milk is like maybe 3.29 a gallon or whatever. And I was like, there has to be an easier way of doing this. But I don't have an answer for those things.
I know, right. Yeah. Well, and then, and some of that's just like also understanding like how to cook those things, right? And the time to prepare it, right? Like that's a skill in of itself too. I learned that, when I lived down south and I worked on a diet and exercise study. And I just remember being like, oh, like again, checking my own privilege and my own bias. I grew up in a house where my mother cooked a home cooked meal every night, and it was Midwestern cooking. And so it wasn't Southern cooking where it was all, to quote Paula Deen, like butter and oil. Like, and I just remember like, I had a patient that just, they were like, oh, well, tea doesn't have calories. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. Like, yeah, black tea doesn't have calories. Are you drinking, you know, black iced tea? And it was like, well, yeah, it's sweet tea. And I'm like, oh, you see those people make sweet tea down south and they're like buckets of sugar. And it's like, oh no. Well, yeah, tea doesn't have calories, but you added to the tea. And it was just like that was not clicking. Sorry, my dog's making an appearance. And it's like my knowledge and was a privilege. And so it was like, yeah, they had it in their head like, oh, well, it's or in your world of nutrition, like I would have patients be like, well, I bought the low fat version. Isn't that healthier? And like, you want to commend them for trying to make a healthy decision. But it's like, oh, when they remove the fat, they actually replace it with carbs and you're diabetic. And that's not good either. Like, oh, and so it's like, oh, like every nutrition trend every year. It's like we're going to vilify fat, and then now everything's going to have added protein, and people are eating 300 grams of protein a day or something absurd. And you're like, well, okay, like, like last year was the year of the fiber, and I don't know. So it's just like, gosh, like how do we just keep it simple and eat real healthy food and go from there?
Yeah. Listen, I know we both gotta hop off here, but
Yeah.
Katie, this was so much fun. Thank you for coming on, and I can't wait to continue chatting and everything.
Yeah, likewise. It was a blast.
Awesome. So